Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing.
Welcome, everybody, to Morning Magazine for the September 2nd, 2020. I have your host, James J. Malouf here. Today, we are joined by the Wood County Sheriff's Department. We have Sheriff Shawn Becker with us today. Good morning, Shawn.
Good morning, James.
And, Shawn, you brought along a friend with you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if I'd call him a friend. No, I would. I would call him more than a friend. A retired Lieutenant Bob Levendoske, one of my mentors at the Sheriff's Department with the recent events with the arrest of John Sarber. I wanted to bring Bob and have him, talk about the case. He worked it. He was there. You know, he was lead investigator there, along with many other people that helped us out during the time that was reported. And I felt it was really important that the people had heard from Bob, who was a big part of the case, from being an investigator, from going through his career to becoming a supervisor of the investigators, seeing that other investigators were continuing to work on this case, this murder case. And also, it's important to bring up that, Bob was the face to the victim's family. He continued to talk to the family members that were still with us today. Even recently, every year he would still have a conversation with people, like I mentioned, are still with us, that are still thinking about this case. And so I feel it's a great opportunity to have Bob here. Like I said, who's not only just a personal friend of mine, but a mentor. Who I'm proud to had the opportunity to work for him for several years when I was an investigator. I don't know how he feels about that.
We're going to find out. That's actually all my questions are about, just getting dirt on you. No.
I think, Bob,
we need more.
Bob, you can go wait in the car.
Yeah. I do want to say a big thank you to our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media for being with us, too, as Kevin and the gang over there. They do great work, and we appreciate them being here. And we will open the phone lines to you guys in a little bit. What I wanted to do before we do that, though, is kind of stretch our legs a little bit about this case and give people some details about it. And first up, before I get too ahead of myself, how are you and yours doing? Your family's doing all right? Sheriff, how is everybody over there?
Doing well. I appreciate you asking, James, as I always do. But we're still absorbing this. And Bob can talk about it, being that it's something that was a case that's a big part of his career, but it's emotional. It's hard to describe. For me, I wasn't there, but I've dealt with other situations like that I could kind of compare them to, and it's somewhat gratifying to get to this point. There's still a lot of work to be done, especially with any type of investigation like this. But it's emotional. You have to realize that somebody lost their life at the hands of another. Right. And that's a tragedy in itself. And, that's hard to move forward with. But there is some sense of satisfaction that we are moving forward. We're ready. The prosecution's ready in this particular case to move forward. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. So we really have to thank a lot of people, and I know we'll get to them, but at least the Attorney General's office and the prosecutor that's been assigned to this case, Annie J. My first impression of getting the opportunity to meet with her and talk with her, she's ready to move forward. And so that's where we're at. But it's I appreciate you asking. Bob can elaborate on it because I think he was intimately involved. Well, I know he was with something that took almost 36 years to talk about.
This is so interesting that not only that you brought Bob in, and I appreciate that so much, not only because this is certainly noteworthy and something worth talking about, and I know our audience is very curious about, but it kind of piggybacks on a couple of subjects that you and I, Sheriff, have been talking about over and over. The last time we got together, we were talking about some of these, taking some positives in law enforcement. And it's not hard to do. They're right there for you. Most of them are common sense. We've kind of gotten used to them so much because all of us have grown up with a law enforcement in our towns or something like that we almost take it for granted, certain things. Mm-hmm. And so kind of bringing a light to some of those, but then bringing a light to things that we just I don't feel like get a spotlight often enough. And one of the biggest things to me is people like yourself, Bob, retired officers, retired detectives who have these cases that they just do not let go of, that they keep fighting for these victims. You're not getting paid to do this. Nobody came to you and said, hey, could you please follow through on this? Or could you not let this go? This is part of why you took this job to begin with. Way back when you first started, not to make you too old, but back when you first started, but to do these kind of things. And the case, this came up in a bit because of the talking with Sheriff Becker about it because of the Golden State Killer and the work that Michelle McNamara and a lot of people did, along with 3 or 4 different retired detectives in different counties working together to bring this guy to justice. And that we were talking about this the last time we hung out, and to have a case like this come up, it just it's symmetry. It really works out perfect, but it also gives us another opportunity again to show this highlight that there can be 2 things true at once, just like we were talking about, that we can agree that there are bad apples out there and there are good apples out there, that you can have both. And this is like this in every profession in the world. You're going to have some bad dentists out there and you're going to have some good ones. I think we all know that one's to be true. We've all read into a bad dentist before, that Steve Martin from, the Little Shop of Horrors kind of guy, like that kind of thing. Yeah. So when it comes to this case, Bob, before we get into the where we are now with it, can we go back in time a little bit, rewind a little, and let people know about this case and what it specifically involves?
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Not a problem. My pleasure. Yes, 1984, in the town of Saratoga, we received a call from actually, Nakusa Police Department received a call from the son of the victim who found her in the bathroom of her residence in South Hollywood Road. And subsequent investigation through that morning showed that she was beaten and stabbed. No sign of forced entry to the house. And at that time, standard procedure would be to, once you get control of the scene and all that, you would call the state crime lab and stuff and have them assist in handling the case. Back in '84, there was only one crime lab with a field response team. This was prior to Wausau being established. And that field response team was already busy, so they kind of told us, good luck, you're on your own. So we started the investigation through that way. It soon became apparent that certain things were missing from the house. That included a pair of scissors, a knife from the sink area of the kitchen, and her telephone was missing. That is an interesting array of items. As far as we could tell, there was some cash visible that was not taken. This being an elderly woman, family woman, motive was questionable from the onset. We couldn't quite figure it out. Those who were living in southern Wood County at the time in the 80s, we did have a major property crime problem. I was looking at some of the statistics as far back as I could get from '84 online, UCR reports and stuff. We probably had 3 to 4 times the amount of burglaries in the area that we did now. And I'm not proud to say that, as I was part of probably trying to solve those crimes, and we weren't doing real well.
You weren't causing them.
We weren't causing them. We weren't.
Yeah, you can't take any blame for that.
So we had a lot of little bands of groups of people that we were aware doing that, and we're thinking from the onset, perhaps it was burglary or robbery gone bad or something. We kind of took that angle. So we had no shortage of potential suspects. We had a lot of people roaming southern Wood County, northern Adams County at that time. Basic police procedure, as everybody knows from television, is especially in a situation like this, you look at the family first and then expand out. And that's where we focused on initially. Not that anybody was a glaring suspect, it's just what you need to eliminate them. And ultimately, we did, to our satisfaction, eliminate any family member as being a potential suspect in that. And so then we began, basically from ground zero, a search of who did it. And as I like to point out, I mean, if we think 1984, that was pre-cell phone, pre-DNA, pre-911.
Might as well be like BC.
It was almost.
It was like it was forever ago.
It was, and
it's a different world.
It was a different world, and communication. It was, when you think back. I mean, we're in a house. We're protecting a scene for 2 or 3 days. No communication really with the outside world because the phone was missing, right. And we had no cell phone. So you would be there for 8-10 hours a day, and if there's any strong or important messages that needed to get you, it was hand delivered by a deputy securing a scene. So we enlisted the help of a Marshfield detective, Randy Lessig, who had just finished a 2-week evidence school. And since we were kind of on our own without the crime lab, and I was working the north end of the county at that time, so Randy and I developed a very personal and professional relationship. And Marshfield PD was kind enough to lend him to us for a couple of days, so we brought him down, said, okay, what's new in the world of crime investigation that maybe we're not aware of. They came up with a few things, and I was going to look up the chemical word, and I still forgot it. But back in the day, they just started doing what they would call super glue, fuming, and that helps harden potential latent prints and makes them more receptive to fingerprint powder. And so, being that the center of the crime was in the bathroom, it was a small enough room. Detective Lessig had from his class, had the pads of super glue. So we, when eventually you are ready to do that, so we fumed it overnight, came back, dusted for any sort of potential latent prints the next day. And I would like to point out, this was probably one of the best crime scenes I was ever in. Mrs. Roberts was a meticulous housekeeper. It was extremely clean in there, and that also lent itself to the fact that if we found anything in there, we knew it wouldn't be a week old or even 3 days old. It would be very close to the time of the crime.
Every bit of information helps.
And that turned out to be very important. Her son was not the son that found her. Her other son was there because this was the day after the end of deer hunting, and he was down here for deer hunting, and he remembers cleaning up there and seeing his mother then clean up because she did not like other people's mess in there. So we had a very pristine crime scene to deal with. Ultimately, we found some palm prints in the bathroom area on the counter close to the body. Those were photographed and what we call lifted with tape, and those are sent to the crime lab. And contrary to TV, it does not come back in an hour or a day or even a week. And eventually we got word back that we probably had a set of palm prints of somebody, but at least that gave us something to work with. So that began the search, and we started talking to all sorts of people, and anybody that was the least bit suspect, we asked them to do their palm prints. That in itself created a little bit of an issue because as opposed to fingerprints, which even at that point were somewhat in the database, palm prints are not logged for any reason, so it had to be a one-on-one thing. And if you think about it, palm prints are hard to get from people. It's not, and so we had to innovate there, and we ended up using a Quaker oatmeal box cylinder. I mean, that's, so every time we had a palm print somebody, we had to go get the oatmeal box, and you wrap a white piece of paper around it and then have the people grab. So those are just
That's very
the
interesting.
little side stories of how we had to plow through that. And it did add to the time continuum of it. It was a very slow process. We'd send down, 6 or 7 palm prints at the time, and it would take forever to get back. Well,
Can't imagine.
Yeah, it was just.
I appreciate the details. Part of the reason we're asking about this is because I want to know the legwork. I want our audience to know the work that you guys put into this.
Thank you, and it was, and jumping around and jumping back. Mr. Sarver, the person we arrested, came to the attention of at that point investigator Dave Laudy, who was shortly after the date of the murder. He was discussing a situation with Mr. Sarver unrelated to this case, but at the time, anybody we were talking to, we would question about this situation. Investigator Laudy felt that Mr. Sarver's affect was interesting when the murder of Mrs. Roberts came up. And he did a report, brought it to the attention of all the other investigators. And then going back to what I alluded to earlier, he was put on a list, but he was nowhere near the top. We thought we had better suspects down the road, and we were concentrating on that. And I mean, hindsight is great. At the time, we went, okay, this is interesting, but we got better things to work on. Eventually, we got to the point where we were eliminating or just didn't know about people who may have had access. So we started going to people who did service work from her plumber to electrician to whatever, anybody who would have reason to be in her house. And ultimately, we got around to Mr. Sarver, who at that point was serviced her lawnmower. And we knew that, and that business was basically a mile away from the house. And we eventually took his palm prints, which he gave to us voluntarily. And probably 6 months, perhaps, after we submitted, the crime lab called and said, we've got a match. And so then we started focusing on him.
Yeah. Before we go to where we currently are with the case and everything, I just had a couple of questions for both of you that came up kind of when you're discussing this. And thinking about it in times past, watching everything from a good Law and Order episode to actual crime cases being solved by retired detectives and that. How important is it? Because time is such a factor. We've all seen the TV show of, the mayor's beating down my neck about solving this case and everything. And that you guys don't need the mayor. You understand that every second that goes by, this case, it's going to be harder to solve. That evidence is, wearing and all these different details. So it's really, the clock is in your heads as far as solving these things long before any, politician or anything like that comes into the play. You guys have on yourselves, you want to solve this. So taking that into consideration, how important is it when you come to a case, or you walk into a crime scene? Did you have to have some thought process? You have to, like certain things you said there, as far as asking the relatives and that right away, taking them out of the scenario or adding them to the scenario, but not assuming. Not walking in assuming, oh, well, I know how this was solved. Oh, well, it was clearly the butler that did it. Like that kind of thing. How important is it to kind of find that balance of being able to think like, okay, well, this could be what would happen, but also not assuming and putting all your eggs in that basket. I'll start with you, Sheriff.
You have to be open-minded, in any type of investigation, because you just never know who might be responsible, and this case sure proves it. In any type of homicide or murder investigation, fortunately, we don't have many, where we live, thankfully. We live in a very safe community, but you have to be very, very open-minded. And Bob's right. In these types of situations, as cruel as it might sound, but you focus in first, and then you start working out, and that really boils down to hard work, hard investigative work, and but who's going to know the most about that individual? Well, people that are close to them, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what with this investigation, if you look through the criminal complaint, you'll see who found her. It's terrible. Her son, who's not with us today, Marshall, found her. And so those are the people you start with, and you develop information. And with this type of, like I said, investigation, it boils down to, and Bob had mentioned it, the crime lab was not available. And that's who we lean on for these types of situations. And if it wasn't for, Marshfield Police Department and the relationship that Bob has with Randy Lessick and Marshfield Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, that relationship is huge, because when you have situations like this, who are you going to count on? Mm-hmm. And then luckily Randy went through some recent training on using super glue and fuming, and then Bob lifted the paw prints.
That's pretty amazing.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, the breakdown of that.
We've kept that for the whole time.
Right.
And as people are, back then, as they're doing the investigation jointly, with other agencies, another thing to bring up, Department of Justice, DCI, was helping out almost immediately, or pretty soon after. And that continued, as we'll talk, later, about why we're here and why we move forward, is because we continue that relationship and help. But you just look at, I think that, getting back to your question, the biggest thing that you have to look at as an investigator is being open-minded, and then starting in and developing that information as you move forward.
And Bob, I know that you were a mentor for him and everything, and a bit of a training of him and such. So I wanted to get his answer first, and then kind of hear your take on that too. When you walk into a crime scene, that balance that you have to walk.
Yes, and as the sheriff alluded to, this was, I think, our last murder that, the murder type murder was in '78. So it's kind of hard to sink in this area of going, okay, this is not an accidental death or something. This looks very serious, and then you think immediately, almost, is, well, we don't have any stranger murders around here. This isn't computing. This has to be family or something like that, and then you start looking at it and going, yeah, probably not. But yes, it's just a matter of you have to be, I guess I'm stating the obvious, you have to be, don't get tunnel vision, because that will waste a lot of time, and we probably did get a little tunnel vision back then when we were focusing on these little burglary gangs that we had. We had nowhere else to go, and we thought that should be the way to go, and that turned out to be a lot of red herrings.
When you're solving a problem, we've all had the math problem in front of us. We don't know what the answer is, so we've got 4 options, and we knock out which ones we know for sure aren't that option first, so we can move on and solve the answer as quick as possible. Cold cases are very similar to this. If you I haven't had this personally in my life, but I've had a lot of close friends that have had this happen, where they had a relative, who was murdered, and they are investigated first and foremost. And I have yet to have one of them not have the same feeling that I would, I feel like, in this situation. I want you to go ahead, vet me, because I care about the victim, and I want you to get to solving this as fast as possible. The fastest way you could do that is by knocking me out of the scenario. I was on the moon. I clearly didn't do it. That kind of thing.
Correct.
So that you guys can move on to hopefully find the actual person that did this. It's not It's not personal. This isn't something where you're like, oh, you know what? I don't like the way that guy's haircut is. I'm going to investigate him. It's not that. It's okay. What can I do to get to the answer? How can I get to that quickest? It takes eliminating these non-answers, getting them out of the way. I look forward to hearing more about the details of this case and everything. I want to get to that. I want to have time to do that. So we're going to take our break now, get that out of the way, so we can just come back and be able to talk. But a little bit later, if we do have time, I would like to touch a little bit on also, because I find this interesting, Bob telling us a story from going on building this, and the relationship you had with other departments, and you and I, our conversations about that and how important that is in today's day and age of departments communicating and working together and everything. That's really interesting to hear that. That's something that was going on even back in the day. It's something we don't hear a lot about. So if we have time, I'd like to touch on that. But just if we don't, I want to make sure to make a note of it, that I think that is very noteworthy to hear that. And that this case, we're not here talking about this today if that doesn't happen, I imagine.
Correct.
We'll be back with more of the Wood County Sheriff's Department and our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media right here on Morning Magazine, AM 1320, WFHR. 65 in Stevens Point, 67 in Marshfield and Wausau, 68 here in Wisconsin Rapids. We have Morning Magazine, your host James here. We're joined by Kevin, our friends over at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. We also have our good friends over at the Wood County Sheriff's Department with us. We have Sheriff Shawn Becker here, and good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning.
And I can't call you Sheriff because I got another Sheriff right next to you, so you guys are going to get confused. It's like, in my family, we've got 5 Jameses, so if somebody says James, we all turn around. So if I say Sheriff, I'm going to, But we do have a retired Lieutenant Sheriff, retired Lieutenant Bob Levendoske with us as well. And Bob, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
You have an interesting article there, Shawn.
Yeah, Pam Hilke, right when we came in today, Carl had saved some information from previous articles and press releases that he had done throughout the years, and she gave me an article from February 4th, 1992, on the front page of the Daily Tribune, and here we have Lieutenant Levendoske here with Lieutenant Dave Loudy, and they're talking about this case, and as I mentioned before, when Bob and Dave were investigating this case, and then they got into some leadership positions at the Sheriff's Department, and then how that case continued on and how they made sure it continued on by assigning to other investigators. But just a really nice thing for Pam. Thank you for making a copy of this. I'm going to do my best to get a color photo of Bob and Dave. Do some of my own investigating work, but no, just showing that how this case continued through the years, through the almost 36 years, and there's so many people that I can name from the day, just doing the research that we've done on the day of the murder till today. There are so many people that we can talk about that helped, and we've mentioned many times in the radio on how important it is to establish that those positive relationships, with especially your other law enforcement agencies, not only within your jurisdiction, but outside of it, and I don't think we'll get time to talk about it, but we went down to help Kenosha just because they asked, and that's what we do. It doesn't matter what's happening, it's they need help, and that really resonates with this kind of case, starting from Bob and then another investigator, Greg Ruby, and we've mentioned, Dave Loudy, and then once getting into that transition leadership positions for Bob and Dave, then Mark Newman is working on it. And then a really good friend of mine, Jay Schroeder, took this over, and this passion just continued. And then when Jay wasn't working anymore, then it got assigned to Andy Simon, who was working for us, and continued that passion. And now Andy's working with the state as a DCI investigator, but that's awesome because he's still working the area. He knew the case really well, and then he got paired up with another DCI investigator, Shane Heiser. Shane's from Wisconsin Rapids, and we already had a strong working relationship with him when he worked down in Marquette County, now working with the state, with the Department of Justice up in Wausau, and he's working with him. And then they have a supervisor up there with the same passion, Cindy Geezy. I can go on and on, and then you look at the state crime lab when they did help us. The FBI helped us. I mean, And again, going back to the day of when this was reported, our first deputy on scene was our previous sheriff, Tom Reichert, who also was helping out with, finding pieces of evidence. And you just look at all the, I can't mention enough people, but the biggest point, there's two things to make. Number one, the teamwork, and number two, not just this case, but any of them where, people call them cold cases and like they're put on a shelf. No, that's not. And Bob can attest to this. We continue to work on them all the time.
That's something I wanted to touch on, was the kind of details in that, where, this is an open case when you're handing it off to the next investigator. Is that correct, Bob?
That's correct.
Okay. So that tells you right there that the term cold case, it has a kind of an entertainment term, and then there's the actual term to it that you guys abide by. There's certainly the TV show kind of term and everything that people think of, like you mentioned there, Shawn, and then there's the actual term of it, where really are any of these cases ever really cold? Maybe the trail has ended or so, and that part of it is cold, but the actual case is still very, very alive for you guys, very, very in your lives and everything. And Bob, when it comes to handing something like that off, is that something you do when you're coming out, you're going into retirement, and then you hand the case like this off, or is that something you do because you have other job, other cases that you have to
or other responsibilities,
right?
Yes, it's you don't wait for retirement,
right.
Obviously, but no, it's if your duties change, you do your best to find somebody who's interested in a challenge, and you want to find the right person, which I think we did, both with Investigator Newman and Schroeder. There were other investigators that I had asked once I left the investigative and went to the supervisory position, and they basically kind of begged off, and that's fine. I guess I would rather, if they're not interested in that type of challenge, then you don't want them signed to a case. Yeah. But you need somebody who's, I guess in my opinion, that's why you go into law enforcement, or especially into the investigative part of it. That's the fun part.
You got to care.
You got to care. You have to accept the challenge, and so, yeah, but every time it's a double-edged sword. Every time it switches a case manager, you lose a little bit, but then you gain a little bit from fresh eyes and a fresh start. So it's a trade-off. But this is excessively long. This 36 years. Hopefully you try, and of course with a homicide, there's no statute of limitations. Most other cases after 7 years or 6 years plus, you would like to close it, but there's no criminal penalty involved for the perpetrator. But you'd like to do that for the family in those cases.
I think that you both bring up a great point that you're not necessarily trying to make. And one of the things that we were in a time where we ask our leaders to be so many different things that we never did before. But one of the things that has not changed from the beginning of leadership to now is great leaders understand that they don't know everything, and that sometimes you need another set of eyes. The greatest minds that we've had, whether it is in the highest office we have, or it is, just a person that working at a gas station managing a couple of other people, is understanding, maybe I need to take my employees' take on this. Maybe, hey, what do you guys think? That kind of thing. Having another set of eyes, as you mentioned there, Bob, can be so key to this. It has nothing to do with, that you just didn't care enough, or that kind of thing. Or the old adage we use in sports, he just didn't want it enough. Come on, he wanted it just as much as the other guy. He just saw something the other guy didn't, or something like that, maybe. Right. It's that angle. It's so important that we have that in all forms of leadership and all forms of really people who are in positions like yourselves, where you're honest with yourself. You're like, okay, I've been focused. I've been staring at this page for so long. Maybe I need somebody else to take a look at this. Maybe I need another detective to take a look at this, or something like that, to just get a fresh set of eyes on it and get a fresh take on it. Mm-hmm. That goes along with the working with other departments, I think, too. That they're hand in hand.
Yeah, it's huge. And you know, we also have to definitely mention the community support. This is a long time coming, and we know people know information. You know, and since we made the arrest of John Sauber, we've had people come forward with information, and we continue to look for that. And it's not just exclusive to the Eleanore Roberts murder. It's to any investigation or crime. You know, if you know something, let us know. And people do know information, and we're always looking for that partnership and that help as we move forward. So that's something that's, you know, very important to note. If you've got information, you know, especially with this case, call us. You know, you can call Crime Stoppers. You can call our dispatch center. We will follow up with you. So it's just an important thing I wanted to make note before we leave today, that we're still looking for the community help. You know, we believe more people are aware or might know something or might recall something, even though with this case you're talking close to 36 years ago. As I mentioned earlier, there's unfortunately especially some family members that aren't with us here to be in this moment. But there's a lot of other people that are, you know, and we're still looking for that help.
I want to make a note real quick before we continue that, you know, normally we open up the phone lines and that sort of thing. I feel that it's not only important but respectful to take our time talking about this and make sure that we cover as much as we can, not only to the point we were talking about earlier about giving people behind the curtain look at the work that you guys put into these cases. This is one case we're talking about. This is, you know, and granted, it's one that doesn't happen every day and that sort of thing, but the legwork is the same with whatever the case might be. You guys are putting in a lot more than we realize, and I think a lot of people assume they know what you do because they've watched, you know, Law and Order or something like that, and that's just not the case. That's not true. But also, I feel that it is important we take our time with this because Eleanore deserves it. The Roberts family deserves it. The friends of hers, the friends and family of hers and everything deserve to not only for us to take a silly hour show like this and talk about her and talk about this case, but to bring some awareness to this kind of thing and to hopefully prevent it from happening again. And sometimes that means the knucklehead out there listening and everything realizes, oh, wait a minute, there's no crime I can get away with. Yep. I had this bit that me and a friend of mine used to do in the city back when we were kids and everything. And it was, what's the perfect crime? And we start talking about it within 5 minutes of the conversation, we realize, oh, wait, that is an impossible question. Crime is an immoral act. It can't be perfected. So there is no such thing as a perfect crime. So hopefully, you know, if anything else, we're telling people, don't bother. You're not going to get away with it. So don't do anything, all right? Just give these guys a break. And as you can see, I mean, a case that's, like you said, 36 years old, and we got you, you know, by all rights and everything. I'm saying this, not you guys. But we can do these kind of things. And especially in this day and age, if this crime happened, you know, this year or a year ago or whatever, it may not take 36 years to solve. I'm not sure. Who knows, you know, but more than likely because of all the things we have, like you had the palm prints and that, we probably could solve it then. You know, just where we are technology wise. You know, the one thing that they do get kind of right about TV shows, the killer chewing a piece of gum and he spits it on the ground and they catch him off of the piece of gum or whatever. Well, I've seen cases like that solved because of those kind of things. So yeah, you ain't getting away with it, and thankfully so.
Right.
So I feel like all that is important. So I apologize to any listeners that wanted to call in, but that was my call as a running the show here. That I feel like Eleanore deserves that time. Her family deserves that time. And our law enforcement that put so much work into this deserves some time to go into this subject and talk about it. And to kind of touch on that before we go to break here, Bob, when it came to the big linchpin in this case, was it the palm prints? Was it that you were holding on to for all those years? Was that a big part of what brought this in?
That was the initial factor, for sure.
Sure.
But then you have to get into why were they there? Why were they left there? Were there other reasons that they could be there? And at the time, and I you know, there was the where the knife and the phone and the scissors were found were kind of left a debris trail towards a certain, but it was a circumstantial case. It is a circumstantial case, and that's what we had I guess it's not the elephant in the room. That's not what I'm trying to say, but we had a professional disagreement between law enforcement and the prosecutors throughout the years. I understand where they were coming from. As a cop, you don't like it because you think you know more than they do,
Sure.
But in fact you don't. They have to present the case, and they were just looking for that next piece to kind of push it over the top, and I think especially in the last 2 to 3 years, all these other people chipping away at it finally compiled enough to push it over the top before we lost everything. It's because it's getting late.
Yeah.
And but it
Well, you mentioned earlier that the people that get into these positions, the right one, the ones that do the job right, care. And you don't have care without passion. So the idea that there's some butting of heads or anything like that,
Sure.
I don't think that's too surprising. I think it goes along hand in hand with what we were talking about before of a different set of eyes on things. And this doesn't take watching a TV show to know that you're not going to go to bat if you're not sure about, if you don't have all your equipment. And most prosecutors, that's the way they look at these things. They want as much, they want a home run as much as possible. They want as much information as possible and as much to go to battle as they can to do this. So I think we can see both sides of it.
Sure.
And certainly appreciate that. More than anything, I appreciate the honesty because, again, that adds to the work that was put into this. And the as much credit to the, as the DOJ and all the prosecutors involved in this case, as well as all the officers. It is a hand-in-hand relationship.
Yeah, no, most definitely, and the professional disagreement, as Bob mentioned, it is professional. Okay, I mean we understand that, and going back a little over a year or so ago, I met with our current district attorney Craig Lambert, and he requested the help from the Attorney General's office, and that's a big part of the reason why we're here. He made that formal request, and then as we continued moving forward with the investigation, the Attorney General's office, like I said, very impressed with the prosecutor, Annie J, that is going to come in and see the case through. I mean, we're still a long ways from there. This isn't, right now, the arrest was made. There'll be a preliminary hearing coming up earlier this month. And then at that point, there'll probably be motion hearings, but we're not going to see a trial for a while. Yeah. That's just how, unfortunately, sometimes our criminal justice system might work. Once somebody's arrested, even for a terrible crime like this, you're not going to see a trial in a month.
One of the things that I think is important in this kind of situation, especially, is having some empathy for people that you may feel like they don't deserve it. Maybe you feel like that this guy, this John, and doesn't deserve any empathy, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but we have to do that because if we don't, we're no different than him. And also, it doesn't take a whole lot for the roles to be reversed. And for you yourself to all of a sudden be in that position. And boy, if you're in that position, you're going to want everybody that, cross their T's and dot their I's and everything. It takes time to do this stuff. We are not in the Middle Ages where I think he's guilty or I think he's a witch. And we go and, immediately take him to the lake and stuff. Thankfully, we have come a long way since then. And we have this. I know we live in a culture that we want things now. We want them now and everything. That's just not how the world works. And in order to get things right, it takes patience sometimes. We're going to take a really quick break. Speaking of patience, I want to keep talking, and I got to take a commercial break. We will be back with more with the Wood County Sheriff's Department and our friend with the Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, Morning Magazine coming up. AM 1320 WFHR. It is 65 in Stevens Point, 67 in Marshfield, 68 in Wausau, and here in Wisconsin Rapids, where we're about to wrap up Morning Magazine with the Wood County Sheriff's Department. We want to thank our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media for being in again, and we appreciate retired Lieutenant Bob being in with us and Sheriff Becker. We were talking off air about this, where once you have the bad guy, And once you have your the person that you are looking for here, that oftentimes we think, well, that's the end of the case. And now it's up to the attorneys and everybody to take care of it from there. But your job doesn't end there, because not only are you probably still looking for more and more evidence to help out the attorneys and everything, but the why. The why of this is why. I think that we often forget that as citizens, that's another detail that you guys you have to figure out. It isn't a curiosity thing. It's part of what you do for data. It's part of that you do to help further cases and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and this is you really when you think about this case in particular, why would somebody brutally murder a 73-year-old elderly woman that, from what we understand, was just a loving, caring person? I obviously didn't know her, but I've gotten to know her. I know Bob knows her very well through Spirit, and the investigation and talking with the family. It's hard. How do you figure out a motive for that? And like you said, James, the why. Why would somebody go to that? Because if the training that we have in law enforcement, in this type of a crime shows rage. It seems personal. When somebody stabs somebody repeatedly and strikes them, it's like, okay, and that's why starting at the beginning of the show, you really have to look at that inner circle about, okay, there's got to be some sort of intimacy here on why somebody would do this. I mean,
it's where I would look first.
I mean, you want to start your investigation and get that. Where are you going to get your best information from? It's going to come from that inner family friend circle with the investigation. So then we go back to the why. Why did somebody go to this length to take somebody's life? And the person in jail is the only one that could really specifically tell us that, to be honest. We could speculate that it could have been something to do with finances. That there was an issue with money, that somebody needed it, which can make sense, but to me that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
All right. If you're going into burglarize a residence or a robbery, why do you go to this level? Why? We can we can speculate. That seems to fit that the motive could have been money driven, but I don't think any of us will either understand or accept the end result of this.
I'll never understand the high-speed car chase. I mean, every one of us that that is over 10 years old understands that your vehicles are designed for that. So what a person's thinking that, I'm going to be the one guy in history to get away. Like, I never understand that. So trying to put ourselves in their minds, I know that is part of your job, but it also could be something that could be pretty daunting for just about anybody to be able to do, as far as putting yourself into some of these criminal masterminds' brains and everything. But that is something that you do have to do in a sense. So not to make light of it or anything, but I hear what you're saying, that as far as the reasoning in that. We have about 3 minutes left to show. Sure. I wanted to give you guys time to touch on anything you wanted to.
Well, I really want to go back to Bob and thank him for being here and seeing this through. He was with us when we made the arrest, along with some other retirees, Dave Laudy and Mark Newman. Took the opportunity in their day to come in and be part of something that has been part of their professional and personal life. As I mentioned earlier with Bob, getting to know the Roberts family, they spoke extremely highly of Bob. And that's hard to do when you have a situation like this that is so tragic. And if you could have at least a positive face of somebody from our agency that continues to have contact with them and just talk to them, is huge. Even after retirement, Bob maintained a relationship with the victim's family, and that speaks very, very highly of Bob as an individual. And you go back to that care. Bob cares. Yeah. Bob cared from the moment that he got to that tragic scene and seen it all the way through. I feel bad it took 36 years for him to see this, but we are here. We're ready to move forward with the prosecution of Mr. Sarver, and we'll keep moving forward. And again, asking the community for help. If you have information, not just with this case, with any of them, whether they're high profile or not, We're always looking for information because we believe some people do still have it.
We, I believe that it is the honor of the living to remember those gone. And that can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it means something like this. Sometimes it means just, remembering a great relative or something like that. But whatever the case, it always comes down to people caring. And when we can talk about officers like yourself, Bob, who continue to care long after the city has asked of you, you continue to do this job. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. We appreciate having a good sheriff's department and you, Sheriff Becker, and people like yourselves in these positions. Because again, good leadership doesn't come lightly, and it takes work. And appreciate the work that you guys put into this and what you do on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Really appreciate it.
I want to say thank you to Kevin, our friends at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, for also being in with us. And I just lastly want to say again to Eleanore Roberts, her memory, to the family of hers, to her friends. Thank you for sharing her story with us. Thank you for letting us be able to talk about this. And we're thinking of you guys and wish you the best. We will be back with more Morning Magazine tomorrow. We'll be talking with our friends at the Will County Sheriff's Department very soon again, next month. You say we do this again next month, guys. Let's do this again.
Yeah,
we'll hang out. We'll talk 90s baseball next month, Shawn. I promise.
Eventually, we'll get there.
We'll get there. We'll have Over the Back Fence coming up for you right here on AM 1320 WFHR.